So breakups are never fun, and they're bad. No matter what, no matter who's having the breakup. And it's looking that way for General Motors and Allison. And I was just talking about this on my radio show. And if you're just joining me here on the bonus edition of the show, I encourage you to check out the podcast of the radio show. And in typical fashion, I know I do this. I ran myself out of time at the end of the radio show. I didn't really get to this topic enough. And I wanted to discuss why the breakup with General Motors and Allison is just getting petty now. I mean, that's what's happening. It's just really getting super petty in a way that you wouldn't expect to see with two big companies like this. But I guess petty breakups happen no matter what level you're at. So I wonder who's going to be having their stuff thrown out on the street in this case. It's probably going to be Allison. I think Allison's going to be out on the street. Might do some couch surfing with some friends after this. So, but to give you some context, a little bit of what I talked about on the radio show. And firstly, I mean, I got to admit, I'm not a heavy duty diesel guy. I'm not. And, you know, there's something about these trucks these days. And I do plenty of towing. I tow my S2000 on an open car hauler, and I use a Tacoma to do it. It's an aluminum car hauler. It's a pretty light towing setup, frankly. I personally don't need to tow a ton. I'm not towing gigantic multi-car haulers. I'm not towing horse trailers or construction equipment. But I know there's guys who do, and those are the guys that these trucks make a ton of sense for. But it always blows my mind how expensive these trucks get. It's nuts how expensive these trucks are. You're spending $100,000 plus on these trucks, and a lot of times, you know, these trucks have issues with engines and turbos and transmissions. But the thing that always blows my mind, and maybe you can attest to this if you are a diesel guy, if you've got one of these heavy duty trucks, whether that's a Ford, a Chevy, a Dodge, doesn't matter. But like, how much does it cost to actually maintain this thing and fix it when it breaks? Because, you know, even though I'm not a diesel guy, I think a lot of us are familiar with the grid heater bolt issue that happens on the Cummins diesels. And I believe, don't quote me on it, that's the 5th gen Cummins. I know I might be stretching my knowledge here a bit, but you know, the grid heater is a component in the intake, and it has a little bolt on the inside. And eventually that bolt, because of the electrical current going through it, essentially disintegrates. Or I should say the bolt disintegrates, and the little nut on the end of it ends up dropping into the intake, and then that finds its way into cylinder 5 or cylinder 6 and basically destroys the motor. And that's crazy to me that for one happens, right? But also the fact that these motors are like $25,000, $30,000 to replace and rebuild. And it's like really expensive. I've heard some horror stories from acquaintances, and I've seen horror stories online, and you might say, oh, well, you can fix them cheaper, but a lot of people are spending a lot of money to fix these engines. Now, the same thing goes for transmissions. Diesel guys, granted, as you start pushing more torque, you modify it, you do a tune, you start slipping clutches and transmissions, you start grading, torque converters and all sorts of issues. That happens because, again, obviously the diesel guys want to build as much power and torque as possible. And so that's where Allison Transmission comes in. Back in the, to give you context, in the early 2000s and the teens, Allison partnered up with General Motors because, you had this horsepower war going on in the diesel world at that time between Ford and Chevy and Dodge. And it got to a point, I think, where a lot of people realize the weak link is really the transmission in some cases. And obviously there's, issues with engines, and I've heard horror stories too with Duramaxes of how, crank pulleys slip off and keyways are either non-existent because they're not engineered to exist, or they break. There's all sorts of stuff. Like, again, not to get into the weeds here, but it blows my mind how you can spend so much money on these trucks and then have to do a motor because of something stupid like a grid heater bolt just out of warranty. It's nuts to me. But the transmissions often, in many cases, especially if you're modifying your truck, are going to be that weak point at that stage. And so Allison makes a lot of heavy equipment related transmissions and things. And so GM said, well, we'll partner up with Allison and put these cool transmissions in our trucks. Well, and that sounds all good in theory, but what I discovered, and this credit to Ezra Dreyer over at Car and Driver, who did a excellent write-up on this. And the headline here is GM and Allison Transmission are ending their longtime partnership. And that's the headline. Now, he talks about in here that, and this blew my mind. I was just finishing up with this on the radio show when I ran out of time. This blew my mind, which is that Allison wasn't actually making the transmissions. So you have the Allison nameplate on there. It's on the fender on your heavy-duty Duramax truck. But it's not even an Allison transmission. That to me is what? Okay, and so apparently, people are saying, "Oh my gosh, the Allison's going away." What's this going to mean? Are we going to get more unreliable transmissions in GM trucks? No, because Allison never made I won't say never, but in the current generation trucks, Allison doesn't make the transmissions in general. A lot of those are being made in the for example, GM in 2020 introduced a 10-speed automatic transmission. And apparently that transmission mechanically is more related to Ford than anything else. And it still has the Allison nameplate on the truck. So when this breakup happened, I guess General Motors was essentially sitting there saying, well, we already make the transmissions and we put those in the trucks. And we just pay for the name of the Allison. It's just a marketing thing at this point. It's literally just a marketing gimmick. And they decided that the cost wasn't worth it. Why are we doing this? We're not seeing any return on it. They're not even Allison transmissions. We're putting the transmissions in there. We're developing all of that stuff. And again, this is probably not a surprise to you if you're a diesel guy. Like I said, I'm not coming to this from the perspective of being a diesel guy. I've owned tons of cars and I love them and I break them. And I've got a truck that generally is pretty reliable. My Tacoma's not bad. Though granted, I've had more issues with that Tacoma probably than any vehicle I've owned. But I still, I still refuse to believe that Toyota can do any wrong, even though the evidence probably suggests otherwise. Having said that, once Toyota starts making a heavy-duty truck, then maybe I'll be a heavy-duty guy. We'll see. They're never going to do that. I don't think Toyota's ever going to do that. Maybe. I can hope. I can pray. But look, if you're really into this diesel space, you probably know some of this stuff already. But as someone, an outsider looking at what these vehicles cost, it blows my mind. It does. So you're not even getting an Allison transmission. You're paying for a nameplate. General Motors is discontinuing that nameplate, but it does get pettier than that. It absolutely does get pettier than that, which is amazing. I'll tell you about this here in just a second. But it's nuts to me. It's really nuts to me. Now, before I tell you why it gets pettier than that, I do have to tell you about one of the show's sponsors, which is Spytec GPS. If you listen to the show, I've experienced car theft. I've had one of my cars stolen, and it sucks, man. It really sucks. Imagine having one of these $100,000 trucks get stolen. That's really going to hit your wallet hard. And anyway, Spytec GPS provides a great solution. They've got a suite of trackers that is good for any use case. And as you know, I did put the tracker. I wanted to see what would happen if I took one of the magnetic cases for the tracker and then stuck it to a bunch of 10mm sockets. And anyway, I know where the tracker is, but it's gone. It's in that ethereal dimension where the sockets went. They took the tracker with them. So anyway, I can't do anything about that, but I did use my own promo code and I ordered a new tracker to replace that. So Auto ADHD 15, save yourself 15% off anything on the Spytec store. You can also get an additional 35% off an annual subscription. Trust me, this beats, you might say, why do I want an annual subscription? Just throw an AirTag in it. Dude, if you're throwing AirTags in your car, if you're throwing it in your, whatever it is, your project car, maybe you got 10 grand, 20 grand, 30 grand sunk into that project car and you're using an AirTag to track it. It's not going to end good for you. It's not going to end good for you. You need something that's a dedicated GPS tracker that has redundancy built into it. You've got redundancy in the form of it does cellular tracking with cellular towers, and it does GPS, does them together. And you're going to get the best of both worlds, which is great because thieves aren't necessarily going to, take your stolen vehicle and put it somewhere conveniently next to another iPhone or Apple device so that AirTag works. Because that's how AirTags work. They don't actually communicate to towers. It's low power Bluetooth. It communicates to nearby iPhones and iPads. That's it. So anyway, get yourself a Spytec tracker. Protect your car. It sucks when it gets stolen. Trust me, I know. And get yourself protected. Auto ADHD 15, spytech.com is the place to do it. So why GM and Allison are getting petty, though, is the fact that General Motors now has said that they are going to, after all of this, they're breaking up with their relationship with Allison. They're saying, gosh, we don't even use your transmissions. So we just put the name badge, the name plate on our trucks, and we hope it convinces. I don't know. I guess maybe it convinces at this point. Maybe they're going for the boomer demographic. Maybe that's it at this point. Or they're going for guys like me who don't drive diesel trucks, which would be weird because why would you be marketing to guys who don't drive diesel trucks when you're selling diesel trucks? But anyway, that's what they're doing. Well, now they're going along and they are going to actually retroactively pull off Allison badges from unsold trucks. So trucks that are already on the lot, they've got the Allison badges on them. They are going to pay some poor lot tech. Maybe they're probably going to have a lot tech do it. They're probably not going to waste actual tech's time with it. Well, actually, that's being optimistic. They might waste a technician's time doing this. They very well might. But someone's job is going to be to go to every Duramax truck on the lot and take that Allison badge that's on the fender, right below the A-pillar, and they're going to pop that sucker off. What are they going to put there in its place? Hopefully something so it doesn't look like garbage. They might just leave the open holes there. Like, they're being petty. They don't care, man. They are pissed off. They are the vengeful X now. And maybe rightfully so. Who knows how much Allison has been charging them over the years just to put a badge on their vehicles. Maybe that's the case. But, a lot of times, when relationships go sour, there's a little bit on both sides here. There's a little bit on both sides. But, they're getting petty with this. And, this is the automotive equivalent of, your ex dumping all the stuff you have on the sidewalk in front of the house. That's what it is. That's exactly what it is. And it might even be your own house. Go figure. So anyway, what does this mean? From a technical perspective, nothing, because they're not using Allison transmissions anyway. So in that sense, it's a nothing burger. Like, people, I've seen some people on social media kind of freaking out about this. And perhaps like me, they didn't know until they were informed that it's not really an Allison transmission anyway. So from a quality perspective, nothing's going to change. And that brings me back to my point I made at the beginning. Why are these trucks so expensive? And why is it that everyone I know who has one has some sort of maintenance nightmare? These trucks are not built to last. They're not. That's obvious. And maybe it's just bias because no one talks about, my truck's been so reliable. Everyone complains about, the grid heater thing, or, the crank snout thing on the Duramax, and these injectors went bad and this is so expensive to replace them. And right, I know there's a bias. We only tend to hear about the negative stuff, and we tend to focus. It's human nature. We tend to focus on that negative stuff. But the negative stuff has been so overwhelming that it makes me feel like there's some credibility to it. You look at old vehicles. Why are old school 12-valve Cummins trucks so valuable? I saw one recently, came across on Facebook Marketplace, but it was from a dealer. A dealership had put up the listing on Marketplace, and it was for like a 91. I want to say it was a 91 Ram with a Cummins in it. So we should still be in a first-gen Ram, but because I believe they did the Cummins in 89. And so first-gen Ram with the Cummins 12-valve. And they were wanting, this truck had 50,000 miles on it, which is very low considering what that is, right? That's actually very low. And they wanted over $55,000 for this truck. And it wasn't like a museum example. Needed a little bit of body work. The paint was a little faded, probably just because it sat outside, but it was low miles. Either that or someone Ferris Bueller did and ran it in reverse, for a while. Who knows? Knock those miles off. But with that, it goes to show, and you know what? That truck sold. It's not for sale anymore. And I've seen other things like this come up. These old trucks, people want these old trucks. Why? Because for one, they were built to last, which has been proven. Look how many of these things have 1 million miles and they're chugging along just fine. But they're also simple. You could still have a manual transmission in your heavy duty truck. It's got roll up windows. I mean, I'm just saying, man, it's, it goes to show that people want a return to the simplicity, and they want a return to the reliability that comes downstream from that simplicity. Now, the critics are going to jump in the comments here and say, well, with modern emissions, you can't do that. I think you certainly can. Manufacturers don't see any return on investment in doing it. Why? Because consumers are perfectly happy spending $100,000 on overcomplicated trucks with overcomplicated systems that need a, $40,000 engine and transmission overhaul just out of warranty. We keep doing this. I say we, I'm not doing this, but you know who you are if you are doing it. And maybe you have to because you do need it for work. You need it for the job site. Like there's in some cases, you do need to do that. It's a business expense and you don't really have a choice. And that's also what's a little frustrating is that, manufacturers have no incentive to make these better vehicles, to make these more reliable vehicles. But likewise, consumers are kind of stuck buying them anyway. And the manufacturer goes, well, if they didn't want it, they wouldn't buy it. Yes and no. Like I've said, there's the business use case where you're probably, if you are using it on the job site, you don't want to have a truck that's got 1 million miles on it already. You don't want a truck that needs a ton of work because when that truck breaks, something will break just out of its age. It'll wear out. It's going to need service. And then you got downtime with it. But I do think that's why even in some of these spaces, we're seeing these old analog trucks start going up in value because some people are saying, look, I can spend $100,000 buying this Duramax Chevy, buying this heavy duty, this Ram 2500 or 3500, whatever, or heaven forbid a Ford, get on that Power Stroke game. You could spend $100,000 doing any of those. Or you could buy an old truck that maybe does have 1 million miles on it, but spend a fraction of that rebuilding it, building a new motor for it, going through the transmission, giving it all the service it needs. And I'm not talking about doing this to a truck from like 2006 or 7. Those are already well into the problem space, but I'm talking about a truck from the, early 90s. And you could spend far less money. Now, granted, the problem is this takes time. So again, if you're looking at this for a business perspective, a lot of times it just makes sense. Look, it's going to be a tax write-off anyway. I'm going to claim depreciation on it. And, I just need a truck for my, hauling business. I just need a truck for my construction business, my roofing business. And you're probably not going to say, I got time to go buy an old 12-valve Cummins with 1 million miles on it for a decent price and then put 15, 20 grand into rebuilding it and making it nice. You don't have time for that. You just need something that works. And that's unfortunately how consumers, I think, are getting kind of preyed on with these new trucks. And then you do have the guys who are, buying these new trucks because, well, I want a heavy duty truck, but I got to have, automated cruise control system, Super Cruise. It's got to drive itself. It's got to have leather interior. It's got to have heated seats, heated steering wheel, infotainment system, 45 speaker sound system. Like when you're in that space, you are also kind of the problem because the people who are buying these trucks as luxury vehicles are certainly not doing anyone a favor when it comes to the market as a whole because, all right, fine, it's your money, do what you want with it. But you're going to come along and spend $120,000 on a fully optioned out whatever it is, and manufacturers go, oh, we should build more of those and make them more complicated, make more complicated systems on them. When realistically, the guys who are using these every day for work don't really need that stuff. They don't want that stuff, and they don't want the cost associated with that. And even though, there's cheaper trucks, there's the work truck trim models, even those are complicated in terms of the technical systems, the emissions, the electronics. Can you buy a work truck trim Ram with manual windows? Can you buy a work truck trim Chevy with manual windows? No, they're all going to come with power windows. They're still going to have Apple CarPlay. They're going to have all this stuff. Do we need that? No, we don't. And do we need to spend all this money on it? No, we shouldn't. We certainly shouldn't. Should you spend all this money for an Allison badge now on a truck that doesn't have an Allison transmission? No. And that goes to the point of the bigger problem. So GM's making their own transmissions, and they're putting Allison badges on it, and they're paying under contract, whatever, X amount of dollars to Allison. You know who's really paying that is you, the consumer. So they up the price of the truck to put the badge on it so that they can pay Allison whatever they're obligated in their contract, because they're not going to take that as a hit to their profit. They're going to pass that on to the consumer. So you're buying a truck with an Allison badge that doesn't have an Allison transmission, and you are paying for that badge. It's crazy. Go figure. Oh, man. Anyway. Thanks for joining me here on the Automotive ADHD Show. Remember, if you're just catching this on video for the first time, I do a radio show every week. It's about cars. Catch the podcast of it. We post clips from the radio show and the podcast here as well on YouTube, Facebook, Spotify. If you're listening on Spotify, remember to follow the show and give it 6 stars. Blow it up. I'll talk to you right here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.